This month on Focus Black Oklahoma, join us as we discuss how mental health advocates are seeking to address rising suicide rates among Black youth.
Listen to an excerpt from a newly released Audible documentary, Tribal Justice, The Struggle for Black Rights on Native Land, reported and written by 2 award-winning indigenous journalists.
Discover the legacy of Bass Reeves, a formerly enslaved person who served as a U.S. Deputy Marshal in Indian Territory.
Getting your first real job is a rite of passage growing up. Sondra Slade's story about her children finding jobs and getting their first paychecks will have you laughing all the way to the bank. All of this and more on Focus Black Oklahoma.
Focus Black Oklahoma is sponsored by the Black Church Traditions and African American Faith Life program at Phillips Seminary, offering a master's degree in social justice online and in person. Learn more at wherefaithleads.com.
This is Focus Black Oklahoma. I'm Jacob Littlebear.
And I'm Kuma Roberts.
Recent studies have shown increasing suicide rates in the United States, particularly among Black youth. Experts in Oklahoma advocate for addressing cultural norms that prevent at-risk youth and their families from seeking mental health treatment. Here's Don Carter with details.
A 2021 analysis by the Congressional Black Caucus Emergency Task Force on Black youth suicide and mental health revealed a staggering rise in suicide attempts among Black adolescents aged 10 to 19. Increasing by 73% between 1991 and 2017. This surge was particularly pronounced among Black males, where recent data highlights an alarming trend among Black males aged 13 and younger who now have the highest suicide rate. Similarly, a 2019 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA Pediatrics, reported a 73% increase in suicide rates among Black youth in this age group over the same time period, compared to a 23% increase among white adolescents. While suicide among African Americans has historically been lower than other ethnic groups, the rapid increase in rates among Black youth, especially over the last 2 decades, suggests this issue shows cause for growing concern. P.G. Goodo, Tulsa-based pastor and mental health advocate, offers a unique perspective on the root of the problem, the challenges facing our youth today, and the roles parents play in shaping their children's mental health.
When it comes to, because, people of color, there are 2 things that we don't play about. We don't play about our God. And it's the other thing of Black and brown people has always, because I was raised like this, you don't talk about your business to nobody. What goes on in this house stays in this house, and you are not allowed to talk to anybody about anything, which when there's things that are going on, and I see my parents that are struggling and they're not wanting to talk about it. So as a child, you are raised into an adult of, I don't talk about my private business. I'm not talking about what's going on with me. So that's the struggle that we are having, is that we've got to not only break, but we have to destroy these curses that we don't talk about anything. And God will fix it all. So I'm not going to a therapist. I'm not going to seek any help. And we are dying.
This is a common cultural norm in many communities, particularly in African American families, where there is an emphasis on maintaining family privacy and not sharing personal or family matters with outsiders. According to the article, Black Mental Health, What You Need to Know, from McLean Hospital, this cultural norm has roots in historical survival mechanisms and stigmas originating from slavery. During that time, enslaved people were thought incapable of developing mental health disorders like depression or anxiety. Christine M. Crawford, MD, MPH, explains, quote, "From those historic misconceptions, we learned to ignore mental health symptoms or call them other terms like stress and being tired," end quote. These alternative terms passed through generations minimize the impact of mental health conditions and reinforce the belief that psychiatric disorders were a personal weakness. Crawford adds, quote, all these factors created a culture that is fearful and uninformed about mental health, end quote, perpetuating stigma and discouraging help-seeking behaviors. As a result, families adopted a keep it within the family mindset as a protective mechanism. Could what was previously used as protection of the family become a hindrance to the health and development of the family?
Oftentimes I'll ask people, do you know what a secret is? It's something that you don't tell because somebody asked you not to. You can't tell nobody. I says, no, secret is shame. It's somebody else's shame. Because they don't want you to share what they may have done to you or what they have been doing. So we're not going to talk about it. I don't want you to share that with nobody. That's because that's somebody else's shame. And I'll tell them, oftentimes you're carrying a secret, which means you're carrying about somebody else's shame, and you don't even know what it's about. Going back to what you're saying, generations of it, carrying it over and over. We don't even know what it's about.
That was Dr. Sherry Carter Green, a licensed therapist in Okmulgee.
I have my master's in counseling, community counseling. I have my PhD in industrial organizational psychology. I have a double degree in ethnic studies. And what I'm doing at this point is I am the executive director, clinical coordinator, psychotherapist, and supervisor for Okmulgee County Youth Services. And what we do here is I provide therapy for youth and their families. We also have various programs. I have a team of coordinators that go into the community, into the schools, and they teach evidence-based curriculums in the schools. We have our 180 program, and that is a 6-week program. It's a preventative program. We're taking now ages, we're doing 15 through 18. We get referrals from the courts, from law enforcement, from the schools, and they have to bring in a guardian with them. And it's a prolific program because it helps them learn to make better decisions, understand what their social networks and connections are. All of our services are offered for free.
According to the Office of Minority Health, in 2022, suicide was the third leading cause of death for Black or African Americans ages 10 to 24. The death rate from suicide for Black or African American males was more than 4 times higher than for Black or African American females in 2020. Limited access to mental health care and the stigma surrounding mental health in Black communities are contributing factors. This stigma often discourages individuals from seeking help, further deteriorating lines of communication and support. Here again is Dr. Carter Green.
Our Black communities and our Native communities, who are they talking to? Who are they talking to? A lot of their information is coming from their peers. And where the peers get their information from. But not having resources that are accessible and affordable. Like I said, we don't charge anything. We even do, right now, we put in for a grant so we can start paying for some transportation. You know, if we need to use Cherokee Nation or what's the CATS buses, so we can get people to and from.
So I wanted to kind of jump in when you asked that question, because like you unpacked it a lot. Environment, boy, but you made the statement, who are our kids talking to? That was a gut punch. And you had asked the question as well. You said you had asked yourself, well, what was I doing at 16? You know, well, I started asking it too as I'm listening to you, and I remember.
Okay.
I remember what I was thinking and how I felt. And to be honest with you, and not to make this about myself, I am identifying is what it is.
Okay.
I remember when I was going through, and I didn't have anybody I could talk to in high school. I had no identity. I was struggling, trying to figure out who I was. I did not fit in. I didn't know me. And I remember contemplating suicide. And it wasn't just a passing thought. When I say I contemplated that, it was there. Depression. I remember
Yes.
having somebody to talk to,
So
and not just anybody to talk to.
you can't talk to just anybody.
Exactly.
So when they come in and there's elephants and stuff around the room, I tell them, I'll ask, have you ever heard there's an elephant in the room? So I explain the elephant is that big old elephant in the middle of the room. Everybody's walking around it. Everybody's trying to avoid it. They act like it's not there, or we're not going to talk about it. What is not said is the biggest issue. So we don't leave elephants in the room. We have to discuss them. We have to learn how to communicate. And it's okay to be authentic with your speech as long as you know how to be respectful as well, and understanding boundaries and understanding respect of self and others. So that's huge, is communication.
And here's more from PG Goodo.
We parent out of fear. And so what we've done is when we parent out of fear of the things that you have done when you were a child and a teen, to just automatically assuming and thinking that that's what they're doing. We've all have done some things that we're not too proud of, right? But we have to have a balance to, I don't care what it is, good or bad, I want you to always know to come to me. Because when you start judging in this generation, the minute that you start judging, the minute that you start pushing them and saying that, automatically assuming that they're doing something, automatically saying that they're doing something because you did it, and now you're parenting out of that fear, then you automatically has closed the door and has opened another door for outside people to start parenting your children. So now you've got the best friends parenting your children. You have other parents that don't allow that at their house, that type of environment at their house. They rather go to their house and their parents are parenting your child. Social media is now parenting your child. The movies are now parenting your child. The door is now open for everybody to parent your child because you have chosen to parent out of fear, and you have chosen to prejudge, and you don't even know the full story.
To address the negative impact of these cultural norms, the Congressional Black Caucus Emergency Task Force on Black Youth Suicide and Mental Health suggests mental health professionals and community leaders adopt culturally sensitive approaches such as normalizing therapy, providing culturally competent care, community-based education, and enlisting the help of trusted messengers such as religious leaders, elders, or other influential figures to endorse mental health services. By acknowledging and addressing these cultural norms, interventions can create safer spaces for individuals to seek help and prioritize their mental health without fear of judgment or stigma. First, we hear from Dr. Carter Green, then PG Goodo.
The thing is, you have to be present. You have to meet a person where they're at. You know, what are their norms? What do they really believe to be true? And being able to connect with them, because that rapport has to be built before you come in trying to fix somebody. You can't fix nobody. I tell you, when I was doing my graduate studies, I was in one course. I'm in the counseling realm, not to be in a school counselor, but there were a lot of teachers that were going to be school counselors. And this was an ethnic class we're in. And one of the counselors, she's a Caucasian woman. She wasn't a counselor at that time, working towards it. She was talking about how she had to save this little boy. I'm like, save a little boy. And she's just going on, and the others, they confirming this and that. And I'm like, saved. He was a little Mexican boy. His mother had died. His father had him, and I think there were there's 5 kids altogether. And Dad had to work all the time. They didn't have much money. And just, the way they were living. So, you know what you say? It infuriated me. I had to save him and take him out that house. I said, you took him out of his home. You took him away from his family. You took him away from his father, who was providing and taking care of all of them. You separated him. How are you helping him? How did you save him? Because his norm was not your norm, and you're going to prejudge. And they were like, what? My instructor's like, okay, Sherry. Okay. I'm like, people have to understand. You can't come into my home and fix this if you don't know what this is about. And that's why you have to build a rapport. You have to be amongst people and be accepting of people. Things are different.
And the struggle with this is our children, anyone, I will say this, they don't want to not be here, but they do want the pain to stop.
Preventing suicide is a multifaceted effort. While social media pressures, peer dynamics, and societal expectations often take center stage in these conversations, the powerful influence of familial pressures, cultural norms, and unspoken stigmas that may keep individuals from seeking the help they need should not be overlooked. Normalizing conversations about mental health within families and communities includes learning how to advocate for yourself, recognizing when you need help, and knowing it's okay to ask for it. For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Don Carter in Okmulgee.
You're listening to Focus Black Oklahoma.
In the fall of 2020, Michael Hill, a Black citizen of the Cherokee Nation, woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone banging on the windows of his home. He called police for help, but the police arrested Michael in his own front yard. When trying to get his case heard in tribal court, he was rejected because though he has tribal citizenship, he has no blood quantum and by federal law is not legally an Indian. His story is told in a newly released Audible original documentary called Tribal Justice: The Struggle for Black Rights on Native Land, reported and written by 2 award-winning indigenous journalists, Allison Herrera and Adreanna Rodriguez. The following excerpt is the 4th installment of FBO's broadcast of the documentary.
It said that tribal courts would administer justice for crimes committed by tribal citizens on tribal land, except for the most serious ones like murder, kidnapping, and rape. Those would go to the U.S. federal court. For non-tribal citizens, they also go to federal court for more serious crimes, but to state court for lower-level offenses. Since the Major Crimes Act passed in 1885, U.S. courts have been using the Rogers decision, not current tribal citizenship records, to decide who they consider to be a tribal citizen, and therefore who should go to which court. I asked Chief Hoskin Jr. how all this actually works in real time.
So now we have a 2-part test. If, let's say, I get pulled over and I've committed some offense, if the state says, is Chuck Hoskin an Indian? They ask 2 questions. Is he a citizen of the Cherokee Nation? And does he have Indian blood? And if they take a quick look at my citizenship card on the front, they'll say he's a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. If they flip it over and see that I have a blood quantum, they'll say he has Indian blood. I meet the test. I go either to the federal courts or the tribal courts. In the case of Cherokee citizens of freedmen descent, they have a citizenship card that's identical to mine. The backside with blood quantum says 0 over 0, and that's the blood quantum. And so the United States says by our test, they are not an Indian within the meaning of the law.
So that's the legal test Okmulgee County Court used to determine whether Michael's case fell under its jurisdiction. These legal cases, acts of Congress, and the way Native people are considered Indian can be confusing. But I'm telling you this stuff because this is the maze of hoops that Native people like Michael have had to jump through in order to get justice in the court of their peers. Over the past 200 years, the United States government has done a bait and switch when it comes to justice in Indian country. As sovereign nations, tribes have the right to decide who is a citizen and who isn't. The Cherokee Nation decided to use the federal government's own system, the Dawes Rolls, to determine who is and who isn't Cherokee. But the U.S. courts don't accept that decision. Instead, they see tribal citizenship as a political identity only until it's not. Thanks to U.S. v. Rogers, when someone's arrested, their Indian identity moves from a political to a racial one.
That falls into that second element. They had to have some Indian blood.
Attorney Robert Gifford said the question of freedmen having or not having Indian blood has popped up in courts all over Oklahoma since McGirt.
They're entitled to all the rights as any other tribal member, for the most part, but federally and for the state courts, they weren't.
Which brings us back to Michael and the status of his case.
In 1 mile, turn right onto East 8th Street.
We're almost there, almost to the courthouse.
Okay, so if they don't let us in with this stuff, I can just run it back.
It's November of 2023, and Adreanna and I pull up to the Okmulgee County Courthouse, a building situated a few blocks from the center of town. It's old-fashioned looking, tall, with big columns. Outside the courtroom doors, there's a big sign saying not to record. So we put our gear away before we enter and wait for Michael's turn. For the last 3 years, he's been trying to prove to the court that he's Native in the eyes of the law. He presented his tribal ID card. He even brought a letter from the Cherokee Nation, but it was rejected. So without that chance of getting the case transferred, he's now trying to get the best outcome possible in Okmulgee. He thinks the charges should be dropped. Eventually, the judge calls Michael's name, and within minutes, his attorney and the assistant DA have a discussion out of earshot. And then it's over. We step outside to talk with Michael and his mother, Diana, to find out what happened.
So I have to come back on January the 10th at 1:30.
Michael will have to come back to court again because he and the prosecutors are at a stalemate.
I was hoping that it'd get dropped so I wouldn't have to come back here. I've been coming here ever since 2020, and it's kind of frustrating.
And a lot of times I don't share it with him, but it really stresses me out. But I keep going, because I know in the end we're going to win.
Chapter 4, Stuck in Court. We wanted to better understand the ins and outs of his case, so we sat down with his lawyer. His name is Ronald Jones II, who says he's been preparing for cases like Michael's for a long time.
I was 5. I saw Johnny Cochran on television, and I saw how he had made my mother and my aunties feel. I had no earthly idea that what a lawyer was or what a lawyer did, but I said I wanted to make people feel like that.
He's talking about the Johnny Cochran, the man who represented O.J. Simpson during his murder trial in the 1990s.
In a lot of courtrooms I walk into, I'm the only black person in that courthouse. I may be the only person of color in that courthouse.
On his website, Ron Jones calls himself the Brilliant Brawler. He was born in Hugo, Oklahoma, and raised by a single mother with his 2 older brothers. By the time he picked up Michael's case, he was familiar with the McGirt ruling in a very personal way.
But just being frank with you, keeping it real with you, in my personal life, in 2021, some teenagers got their hands on some guns, tried to rob my brother, went bad, and they killed him. And one of the teenagers was indigenous, and the other was not.
The teenager who wasn't Native went to state court, but the Native teen was investigated by the FBI. You might wonder why the federal government is getting involved in a murder case in Oklahoma. It's because of the Major Crimes Act that I mentioned earlier. It says that when Native people are accused of serious crimes on Native land, their case gets handed over to the federal government instead of staying with the tribes or going through state court. Since McGirt nearly tripled what the U.S. government considers to be tribal land in Oklahoma, the Major Crimes Act now applies to a lot more cases, including Jones's brothers. Jones said that after his brother's death, he found himself between 2 legal worlds. His mother was confused about why the federal government was involved. After all, the crime happened in Choctaw County, Oklahoma. Shouldn't it be the local courts who prosecute his brother's alleged murderer?
Having to explain to mom and them, it was confusing. It's like, well, why this kid getting this? And why we got to go to the feds? And why we got to do all this? So just like a real insider perspective, you feel me, of like, from a victim's perspective of how McGirt, it's confusing for a lot of folks.
And Jones isn't alone. After the McGirt decision, there were a lot of Oklahomans who were in this situation, including Michael and Dietta after Michael's brother Mikkel was murdered in 2016. Remember, I told you about that case earlier in our story. It turns out the people responsible for Mikkel's murder were Native, and Mikkel was a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, like Michael. The crime occurred in 2016 in Okmulgee, which wasn't recognized as tribal land at the time, so it went through the Okmulgee County Court to convict those two people responsible. But after the 2020 McGirt decision, Okmulgee again became tribal land in the eyes of the U.S. law. Many people who'd already been sentenced wanted to get their cases dismissed retroactively because the state now lacked jurisdiction to try cases when they involved Native people committing crimes on Native land. It's called post-conviction relief. In 2021, the people convicted of killing Mikkel did exactly that. I told Michael and Dietta about this after we found it in our reporting.
So you both didn't know that they argued to get the case dismissed?
They were surprised.
No. This is my first time hearing this.
During the same time that Michael was trying to get his case moved from Okmulgee County Court to a court of his peers in tribal or federal court, the people responsible for Mikkel's murder were trying to get their case dismissed too.
They argued to have the confession thrown out because he said that the officer didn't have the jurisdiction. It was an Okmulgee police officer, didn't have the jurisdiction at the time to extract that confession because this was Muskogee land, the victim was a Native person, and that he also was Native, and that they should throw out some of the charges based on that.
I'm telling you about this because Mikkel and Michael are brothers with the same parents. They're both Cherokee freedmen with zero blood quantum. But records show that the same court that determined that Mikkel was a tribal citizen said Michael was not.
I didn't know that.
We didn't know that.
I hope it's okay, but we're going to mention Mikkel's case in this story because I didn't know about it until we started doing this research, and I just find it so just so interesting that in one instance they'll consider one son's Cherokee citizenship,
right?
And in another they won't.
Right. And they both was my sons.
You're listening to Focus Black Oklahoma. Join Focus Black Oklahoma on Saturday, February 1st at the KOSU studios in Oklahoma City for the opening of an exhibition featuring Black rodeo photos. The event is from 1 to 3 p.m. Please visit rodeo.kosu.org and sign up to receive further details. This program is funded in part by the Oklahoma Humanities, OH, and the National Endowment for Humanities, NEH. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in the program do not necessarily represent those of OH or NEH.
Thanks for joining us on Focus Black Oklahoma.
Kristi Williams, a prominent community activist and descendant of Creek freedmen, is making waves in Tulsa with her Black History Saturdays program. The free community school, which teaches Black history in response to curriculum restrictions in public schools, has garnered national recognition and a $100,000 award from National Geographic Society.
Williams is also involved in various initiatives, including efforts to establish a new museum on Greenwood Avenue and work on reparations for descendants of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre.
She sat down with FBO executive producer Quraish Ali Lansana to discuss her many roles in the community.
Well, Black History Saturdays, I always tell people, and they're like, Kristi, really? I'm like, yeah. I mean, I started because I got pissed off. I kind of always wanted to do this. It's so funny how you manifest these things to yourself. But I always wanted to create a space where the community can just come and learn Black history. And when Governor Stitt signed the House Bill 1775, I really just got so pissed. And I said, you know what? I got to make this happen. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I am not a traditional educator. I don't know, but I do know how to bring people together. And so I just organized educators from pre-K to adult. There were a lot of educators that I thought who would be great. And they were like, Kristi, I love what you're doing, but I can't risk losing my teaching certification. You know, I'm almost about to retire and I get it. I get that. But there were a lot of people who said no. And now some of them say, I wish I had not said no. And I wasn't upset. Like I said, I understand because teachers are being targeted. So I totally get that. Black History Saturdays take place at 5424 North Madison Avenue. And we do it on the second Saturday of each month. It's a school day, a whole school day. And that means that breakfast starts at 8:45, class starts at 9:15, and we end about 2:30. And breakfast and lunch is free. The program is free. The entire program is free. Also started a banned book library. So I have a library where the books are still coming in so people can come in and check out books as well. I'm super, super excited about that. I've been able to do this without a grant since February 4th, 2023. And I've just been begging and begging and begging. 2892 miles to go initially gave me the seed money for $10,000. Which is supported by the National Geographic Society. And then Reverend Chris Moore and Dr. Goss of Morning Star Baptist Church, they got together and got me $15,000. That's how I was able to keep it going. Rose Washington, thank God to her and her donations. William Tisdale, Eli Grayson, people like that who continues to give. And then through my Give Butter, my donation link, there's people from everywhere gave me like another 16,000. So that's how I've been able to do it. So I guess I jump into my award. I got.
Well, yes, you kind of got a major award.
Yes.
So it would be, and it's very much connected to your work with Black History Saturday. So why don't you tell us about that?
There's this thing called the Wayfinder Award from National Geographic Society, and they pick 15 people annually. And I was one of the 15 people that they chose. And they choose these people who are what they consider to be doing groundbreaking work and making the world better. It was amazing to get that award. And then that allows me to get $100,000 for Black History Saturdays. So I opened it up to organizations, nonprofits, where I go in and teach their employees the importance of Black history and why we need it and what is the difference between learning and studying Black history and giving them some Black history lessons. So I've been really enjoying that. The Tulsa Birth Equity Initiative booked me for that, and I love it. And I'm going to do 4 more classes through 2025. But one of the things, Q, that really got to me was I asked the workshop, how many of you, by show of hands, know what House Bill 1775 is? And only 5 of them raised their hands. Then I asked, by show of hands, how many of you know that Black history is being restricted in the public schools of Oklahoma? Those same 5 people raised their hands. And this is a room of 30 people. And I asked again, by show of hands, how many of you know that there are over 100 books banned in Oklahoma? And about 10 raised their hand. So there's a gap of information, vital information, that is being kept. I think that's intentional as to why they don't know this. So I said, wow, I got a job to do. I think because for so long, we've learned Black history in February. No one is really talking about Black history. And when you live here, you know there was a massacre that happened, but that's pretty much it. I always say Oklahoma is in a bubble. I consider myself being well-traveled, but I really see that. I really believe that. I feel like we're in a bubble. We're not aware of a lot of things. A lot of us, we work, we go home. We're just making it day by day. We're just making it day by day. We don't have the luxury, honestly, to take that extra time to get to learn about who we are and where we come from. And so that's why Black History Saturdays is important. That's why we need to offer it for free to people and maybe work around their times to make sure that they're able to get that history. But I know it's something that you have to want to, but we have to put it in front of people. When I first started in February, I had 120 participants. This year, I have actually 168 participants on the books. One of the things that I hate competing against is sports. Most people, we got games, we're not gonna make it. We got games, we're not gonna make it. But, I hate competing against sports because I think learning Black history should be a priority. I would say if you want to give to Black History Saturdays, please go to Black History Saturdays. We're on Facebook. If you just Google us, everything will pop up. So there's a way for you to donate there. And also come visit Vernon AME Church and get a tour. You can make a donation as well to Vernon AME Church. We do need a person of color, a Black person, to be mayor. I mean, I'm just going to have to say it like that. We need a Black person to be mayor. It is time for it. And I think if we get this wrong, that percentage is going to be lower. It's going to be lower because people are just tired and they're going to go back to just surviving day after day.
You're listening to Focus Black Oklahoma.
Would you like to pitch a story to FBO?
Or work with us as a correspondent?
Please email us at contact@focusblackoklahoma.com.
Or call 918-807-3886.
From runaway enslaved African to federal law enforcement officer, Bass Reeves lived a long and legendary life. In early January, Reeves was commemorated with a new bronze statue at the Three Rivers Museum in Muskogee.
Here's Carlos Moreno with the story.
Historian Art T. Burton wrote that United States Marshal Bass Reeves was, quote, one of the greatest peace officers in the history of the American Western frontier, unquote. Reeves is said to have been a likely inspiration for the radio and television series The Lone Ranger, and has been depicted in films, comic books, video games, and a recent Yellowstone spin-off series starring David Oyelowo. He was honored on January 11th with a new 8-foot bronze statue in Muskogee. City leaders, history buffs, and fans of the legendary lawman stood in freezing winds and melting snow for an unveiling ceremony at the Three Rivers Museum located in Muskogee's Depot Green area. During his remarks at the statue dedication ceremony, Mayor of Muskogee, Patrick Cale, spoke to the audience about Bass Reeves' incredible story, expressing that the tales of Reeves' heroism are nothing short of mythical.
He was a deputy U.S. Marshal, a gunfighter, a farmer, a scout, a tracker, a railroad agent, and a runaway slave. He spoke the languages of several Native American tribes, including Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Creek. This guy was a real Renaissance man. Reeves and his family farmed until 1875 when Isaac C. Parker was appointed federal judge for the Indian Territory. Parker appointed James F. Fagan as U.S. Marshal, directing him to hire 200 deputy U.S. Marshals. Fagan had heard about Reeves, who knew the territory and could speak several native languages. He recruited Bass Reeves at the age of 37 as deputy marshal. He was one of the first African-American deputy U.S. Marshals west of the Mississippi River, mostly working in the deadly Indian Territory. The region was saturated with horse thieves, cattle rustlers, gunslingers, bandits, bootleggers, swindlers, and murderers. Reeves encountered some of the most ruthless outlaws of his day. One story had him going after a gang, a ruthless gang of 5 members, and he brought them all back into the judge. 1 against 5. That's just amazing to me.
Chief of Muskogee Police Department Johnny Teehee, a member of the Cherokee Nation, acknowledged Reeves' relationship with Oklahoma's native tribes. Escaping slavery after a card game and physical altercation with his master, Reeves fled to Indian Territory in 1862 and found refuge among the Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole tribes.
But on behalf of the men and women of the Muskogee Police Department, I want to say it's truly an honor to have an opportunity to be a part of this. You look at all the past, you're always trying to find something to kind of hang your hat on as far as history. And I think there's not a better person to do that with as far as the Muskogee Police Department goes than with Mr. Reeves.
After serving 32 years as a federal peace officer in Indian Territory, Reeves became an officer of the Muskogee Police Department, serving from 1907 until he retired 2 years later, shortly before his death in January of 1910. The statue depicts Reeves in this later stage of his life, walking his beat and carrying a billy club. It is said that he was so intimidating that a crime in Muskogee was never committed while the town was being watched by Bass Reeves. Again, here's Police Chief Teehee.
The fact that he was here walking these beats at 70, that's pretty amazing. I won't be doing that, for those of you wondering. But no, truly, it's an honor to be here. And like I said, on behalf of the Muskogee Police Department, it's an honor just to be associated and at some point in my career to have had the opportunity to wear the same badge that he did at some point. So thank you all for the opportunity. And like what Mayor Kell said, this is something he really would have been honored about, is the number of people who braved these temperatures and got out here to be a part of this. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Ann Barker Ong, who serves on the board of Main Street Muskogee and the Muskogee Area Arts Council, expressed heartfelt thanks to sculptor Joel Randall, who created the statue.
Words fail me at describing how I feel about the wonderful piece of art that you have created for us, and the delight I have to see this dream come to fruition. We were very careful in selecting the artist for this statue. Along with your obvious artistic talent, your admiration for Bass, and your understanding of our wishes for a respectful and appropriate rendition of his likeness won the day. We certainly found the right person in you. Thank you so much.
Randall, from Ponca City, is nationally recognized for his bronze depictions of historical figures. He talked about the full circle moment he felt creating this statue for the town that inspired him.
This is the one place in the world that inspired me to become a sculptor at a young age. I don't know if anybody knew that, but it was when I was about 9 years old. I was with my dad at the Veterans Hospital here, and you may be familiar with the World War I Doughboy outside. I remember the first time I saw it. That was the first bronze sculpture I've ever seen in my life, and I remember being so just mesmerized by the detail and the extraordinary care that the artist took to make that happen. And I was a big fan of military history even as a child, and so I just loved it. And I told my parents, I said, hey, can we get some clay or something? They went to the local hobby store here in town and got me some clay, and I tried it for my first time. I don't think it was a very good, successful effort, but I thought it was important that I would share that with you, how much Muskogee means to me, that I was inspired to become a sculptor here in this wonderful town, and to now have an opportunity to have a sculpture of my own, bronze sculpture, and I can't think of a better person that I could have made the sculpture of.
A group of volunteers attended the day's festivities dressed in period attire from the late 19th century. Mr. Roy Williams, who portrays Bass Reeves, said that for him, this event was not to be missed.
When I first heard about him, I said, oh my, so that's a man's man. And I didn't have all the details when I first heard about him. My pastor preached about it. And so that was my first time hearing about Bass Reeves. And I said, wow, that guy's something else. And I never did think that I was going to become a portrayal of Bass Reeves in my lifetime. Right. But it's been a real blessing for me.
For more about Bass Reeves, check out Art T. Burton's book, Black Gun, Silver Star, The Life and Legend of Frontier Marshal Bass Reeves. To visit the statue, contact the Three Rivers Museum in Muskogee, Oklahoma at 918-686-6624. For Focus Black Oklahoma, I'm Carlos Moreno in Muskogee.
Getting your first real job is a rite of passage growing up.
Sondra Slade's story about her children finding jobs
and getting their first paychecks will have you laughing all the way to the bank.
We have all heard the saying, do something you love and you will never work a day in your life. This saying is to encourage you to find your passion and move in the direction that pleases your soul, which sometimes as an entrepreneur means you're actually working harder than you did at a regular 9-to-5 and get less free time. But the joy and ability to work for yourself is such a rewarding feeling to some. My days turn to nights and my nights have turned to days, but I still pursue my dream. As my kids got closer to being able to work, I would caution them saying such things as, you have your whole life to work. Relax. Be a kid. Enjoy the time you have now, because once you start working, it will be hard to stop. And lastly, what do you desire to be when you grow up? I would get a myriad of replies. I don't know. I want to be president. I want to teach. I want to be an artist. I told my kids that I started babysitting for my neighbors. They looked at me with horror and terror in their eyes as I explained how this was a good, nice job. I totally forgot that we live in different times. And then my daughter said, "Someone paid you to watch kids?" At that moment, I wondered if she thought I wasn't up to the job or if she thought I had been doing a horrible job with them. Then I explained how I busted the hubcap on my dad's 55 Chevy Bel Air, trying to impress my friends as I got to drive it and mistakenly misjudged the curb. My dad told me I would have to pay for it. Then I had to get a real job, and I worked at Simple Simon's Pizza. I worked hard for the money to pay for the hubcap and get back in my dad's good graces so that I could drive again. Once again, my kids were confused. My son said, "Granddaddy made you pay for that when he worked on cars? Y'all didn't have child labor laws when you were growing up?" I just shook my head and continued. I told them that I got the money and I went with my dad to the auto parts store, and how happy I was when the guy said it was only $25. But as I started to put my remaining money back in my pocket, my dad explained to me I never asked him how much he would charge to put it back on. And sadly, that cost me money, but taught me to learn to shop around for the best deal. Underneath his breath, my son said, "No wonder she's always comparing stuff." My son said at 16 he was ready to work. I asked him what type of job he wanted, and he went on about how he wanted to work on computers, and we talked about Best Buy, but they didn't hire at 16. I told him about my friend that had opened up a barbecue place, which he was fond of. Thankfully, I had already prepared him on how to conduct himself at an interview, how to dress for an interview, and reminded him, even though I knew the owner, he still had to have a good interview to get the job. The morning we went, he got up early, showered, and put his debate suit on and hassled me about not being late. He was so happy when he got the job, but disappointed that he could only work on weekends as they didn't have evening times. But he went every Saturday, anxiously waiting on the day of his first paycheck. On the day he was to receive his first check, we told him we would take him out to celebrate. He laughed and told us no need to worry, he would pay for everything. At that moment, his dad and I looked at each other and laughed and said, "Okay, it would be nice to be treated." Before the end of his shift, we sat outside and waited for him. He and the owner, my friend Adam, came out to take a picture with him getting his first check, still in the envelope. We told him to hurry up because now we were getting hungry. He said, "I'm ready to open this envelope." So we waited. He was smiling so brightly, we almost needed shades. He tore open his envelope as if that was his first Christmas gift he'd ever received. His eyes first went to the amount, and we could see his forehead burrowing in confusion. Then he opened up and looked at all the information on the stub, to which his head went back and forth. Then he turned the check back over, looking at the amount. He was silent. I finally asked him if he was ready to go now. His eyes glazed over, and he said, "I think something happened to my check." His dad said, "What, was your name wrong on the check? What's wrong with it?" He sadly looked up and said, "This can't be the right amount." At this point, the check looks like a wet noodle in his hand. He looked at us and said, "Who are these people in the back? Because they've taken a bite out of my check." As he rattled off the federal taxes, FICA, and OK state withholding, he said, "I got to pay all these people?" I told him, "Well, you know about taxes, as we've talked about this before." He was like, "But who is FICA? FICA?" And I said, "Feeding independent children always." His dad and I both laughed for a few minutes till we realized he was not laughing. And now his sadness is anger and he's ready to go. As we drive to the restaurant to eat, we let him know that you don't have to pay for your day of celebration. He mumbled, "I can't celebrate anywhere with this." Silently, his dad and I laughed. Over dinner, we reassured him that things would look up and that this was just the beginning. He ate, but not with the usual abandon of a teenager. I noticed how he really looked, not just at the menu, but the prices. A friend of mine needed a teenager for a job, and my daughter had started working for her at Social Media Tulsa. She did the job, and Cheryl asked her to send an invoice. A few days passed, and Cheryl reached out to me to make sure she had the right email. I checked and told her I would follow up with Sydney to make sure to see what the issue was. I asked my daughter if she had got the email, and she said yes. I asked her about the invoice, to which she asked me for Cheryl's number. I gave her the number and waited for her to call Cheryl. After she said her greetings, she then told Cheryl how much she was owed. Then a few minutes later, my daughter looked confused. I asked her, what's the issue? And she said, well, I called Miss Cheryl, because she has manners, and told her in my voice how much she owed me. I stared blankly at my National Honor Society child and laughed and shook my head at the same time. I told her that is not an invoice, and then I had to show her. I blamed the school system for this. At last, she took a part-time job in fast food, and she had already been schooled by me and her brother about the shock of her first paycheck, so I think she was better prepared. Her first check still did give her a bit of a shock, but not as much as my son. Once summer started, I asked my daughter if she would like to increase to 40 hours a week, and almost before I could finish, she said, oh no, people that work 40 hours look tired.
Focus, Black Oklahoma is produced in partnership with KOSU Radio and Tri-City Collective. Additional support is provided by the Commemoration Fund and Press Forward. Our theme music is by Moffat Music.
Focus Black Oklahoma's executive producers are Quraish Ali Lansna and Bracken Clar. Our associate producers are Smriti Iyengar, Jesse Ulrich, and Naomi Agnew.
You can visit us online at kosu.org or focusblackoklahoma.com and on YouTube at Tri-City Collective. You can follow us on Instagram at FocusBlackOK and on Facebook at facebook.com/FocusBlackOK.
You can hear Focus Black Oklahoma on demand at kosu.org, the NPR app, npr.org, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Did you know KOSU accepts vehicles as a form of support? You get a tax deduction, and we'll take care of the rest. Visit kosu.org or call 855-277-2346.